Hey, and welcome everyone to this new episode from Hadith Tech. Hey, Forrest.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. It's finally getting like nice and warm here in Canada. I've been this entire weekend I was like outside a ton. We have like some beaches nearby, so biking a lot. So yeah, pretty good.
That's very good to know. That's uh, awesome. I'm really glad that you accepted this invitation and to talk with you. So I think it has been like long time since we met in GitHub Universe. So.
Yeah. It's been several months, and I definitely love these opportunities. Where I mean, we're gonna get into this later, but the opportunities to speak with like other GitHub campus experts and the opportunities to just kind of go over stuff that we've been working on. I normally am on your side where I'm like talking with other people for meetups and stuff like that. So for me here, I'm like chilling out. I'm like hanging out. It's all a good time.
Yeah, I think like as you mentioned, this kind of opportunity when you like join such conference and stuff like that, you don't know what's bring to you. Like this kind of podcast when you just like I'm interviewing you. That right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, every other podcast or meetup thing that I do, I like to keep it super chill where it's like the questions I ask and stuff are super natural. And it's not like I have a whole bunch of prepared difficult stuff, but instead I'm just interested in what other people are doing. And so, I mean, for myself, I'm like, sitting on the other side, I'm kind of like curious on what you'll be asking, but at the same time, I know it'll be, yeah, pretty nice.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like for me, it's the same as well. Like I used to have such kind of structure where I used to prepare a question and everything like that, but it was feeling kind of a robot talking, a human rather than just a
Yeah.
natural podcast. So I think like moving to this such kind of conversation would be much better. Uh,
Mhm.
so to start, like, so the audience, not everyone know you. So can you like introduce yourself? What are you doing, and what kind of work you are working on right
Yeah.
now?
Absolutely. So my name is Forrest on GitHub and a lot of other places. I'm Angel on Fira. I've done a lot of work in the open source community for Rust game development, and so I'm working on an open source game called Valorant. I've done a lot at my university as a GitHub campus expert. I got like the cool box right here, and so both Abdul Rahman and myself are campus experts, and that's how we sort of met. And through this program, I've been able to run a GitHub field day. I've been able to go to a few different events. So I was at HackCon last year. I was at GitHub Universe, and I actually got to speak on the main stage about code spaces and education. And so for myself, this was, I mean, a really cool opportunity to kind of take it to the next level. Where at my university, I tried to get a lot of students integrated with like a lot of not as much maybe like web frameworks or like specific tools, but a lot of the time the workshops that I'll run is very general on like improving skills. And I run like a lot of security competitions. I run game jams, and so a little bit all over the place for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like before elaborating there, I would like to know how you started into coding and how you get into open source. So like what was the first time you started?
Yeah, that's a good question. And like I've tried to put it together in my mind because like when you're young, you don't really remember any like or what you consider coding and stuff like that. But I do remember when I was young, my dad had like a Lego Mindstorm set, and I would do like the visual coding there where you tell like a motor
Yeah.
to run for a second. And for a long time, I didn't consider that coding. But when I look back at it, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that's like you're doing logic. You're trying to think through problems, how you might use the sensors to solve things. And so when I was young, I did that, and then I read this textbook when I think I was like 11 or 12 called Game Programming for Teens. And this is like one of the ones that I remember as like a very pivotal point because I'm like, oh man, I'm reading this book before I'm a teen and it's all cool and stuff like that. But then I look back at it now and I realize that there's so much that I did not understand from that book. Like I did not understand at all what arrays were. And
Yeah.
I went into like my high school programming class and we got to like learn more. And I learned, oh, there's actually way more out there than I thought there was. And so and since then, when I started university, I didn't do very many side projects for the first few years. I went to like a lot of events, a lot of meetups, and kind of exposed myself to a lot of ideas. But it wasn't until like my third year of university that I started working on side projects and sort of playing around a little bit with open source. But I think that that became a lot more prevalent once I found that a lot of open source is very community based, and I was able to like jump into that side of it a lot. So I think, yeah, over the years, it's been like very gradual. I've been at university for a lot longer than many other people have. And so that's made it like very possible for me to uh, kind of learn how to work on a lot of projects, how to use a lot of different technologies, and also what works really well for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And since you are like have been for a long time in university, what was the decision for you to stay like in the university for such a long time?
Yeah. This is a great question, and it's the type of thing that when a student hears that I've been at university, so now I just finished my like 8th year at university,
Yeah.
and so explaining that to a student who wants to get out in 4 years is like they're like, why would you do that? What's the point? And for myself, I did my first 4 years very like on time and everything was done. But then once the pandemic hit, I started taking stuff super slow, where I was
Yeah.
focusing a lot more on side projects and doing like open source work and a lot of this kind of stuff. And I found that while I was a student, I can focus a little bit on courses, but I wanted to focus on a lot of other stuff. And I've been doing like contract work for quite a few years, and so I was like, well, in this sort of like place that I'm at, it makes a lot of sense for me to just take one course a semester, prolong it for a few years because of that, and then be able to work on a lot of cool stuff on the side. And so this is definitely not the path that most people will take, but for me, I found it to be like super helpful for being able to build myself a lot deeper into the community at my university, to be able to help a lot of people, and then also be able to tell them the story. Because so this story, it worked really well for me, and I don't
Yeah.
expect it to work very well for almost anybody else. But for people who kind of go into university and think that they have only one way to do it, I kind of want to show them that, yeah, maybe like some like if you can draw out your passion earlier, if you can find what you want to work on, then it will allow you to explore a lot of things that you might not have been able to during university. And so that's what I try to like gear my story towards. It's not to convince students to prolong their university career without a reason, but instead to find other ways to do stuff in university.
Mm. That's really great. Like, since you are already in university and you're doing some kind of contract work on the side, I think that you have like more in-depth detail and you have like a wide vision on the stuff that you are doing. Yeah, like
Mm-hmm.
you already mentioned, like you are working on, you did stuff related to cybersecurity and game dev. So some people would think like this is two different stuff. So like, how can you manage that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for myself, I have found passion in both of them, but also I have found what I do not like in computer science as much. Or not really what I do not like. It's rather like what I can't get myself to like intrinsically learn or like intrinsically find motivation for. And so what I found is like when it comes to data science, like I've not been able to go very deep down that path. But on the other hand, when it comes to game development, at my university, at Carleton University, we have a game development stream. And so
Yeah.
you can take courses each year that are related to game development. And it starts out with like game design and then goes into like engine development and other game development ideas. And we also have like a security stream. And so I'm in the game development stream, but I was able to take courses from the security stream as well. And then also, I mean, with both of those, there's really good events that tie into the educational learning outcomes. And so with games, you have game jams. And this is just like sort of a hackathon. You might spend like 3 days working on a game with a team. You have to have it done in that amount of time. At the beginning of the jam, there's normally a theme that's released. And so just as an example, the Global Game Jam happens around the end of January each year, and that gives you an opportunity to work with a team, but with other teams from all around the world also working on their own games. And there's one theme that's released every year, and so a few that happened in the past, like there was Waves, that was a pretty cool theme. Ritual was another cool theme. Lost and Found. And so all of these different themes can mean so many different things in game development. And so with a jam, you have the ability to explore the design process, the making sure that you have like a good scope for the problem and everything. And then on the other hand, within security, there's these events called capture the flag competitions. And so
Yeah.
the idea is that you have a lot of different challenges that you can do. And at the end of each challenge is some flag that you can submit for points. And so maybe you have to hack a web server, go find a file on it to submit, or you have to, you'll get like some file and you have to do forensics on it to find, oh, in the header of this JPEG image, there was like a hidden flag. And so with both of those, I really enjoyed doing them in my first few years, and then in my last few years, I really enjoyed running them. And so I find that every single one of these events that I run, we get a lot of feedback from students saying like it has helped them out a lot, and for them, it either showed them something that they didn't know they were interested in, or it gave them the ability to practice more than what school offers. And so, I think to answer the question, I was interested in both, and I found good ways to be super interested in them.
Yeah, that's like for me, like when you mentioned like capture the flag and you talked about the challenges that you have there, and then you start to like let's say organize such events and stuff like that. It just like reminded me that or the idea of having like a game and the challenge behind the game. So you already kind of when you plan a game and or design a game, and when you design an event that have the capture of the flag, it has like the same concept when you like need to engage people.
Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of overlap in both. Where
Yeah,
when it comes to um, security, especially, you want to gear a lot of these challenges to something that is very accessible to newcomers. One of my biggest
yeah,
goals is like so many people will go into university not really knowing what they want to do within computer science, and so
yeah,
what I want to do is show them a lot of like the foundations of security. So with each of the challenges. There, or I guess each of the tracks of challenges, you have like cryptography, forensics, steganography, web hacking, reverse engineering. With each of these are things that like a student in first year has likely never heard of each one of those.
yeah,
But if I can make a super easy challenge in each of those categories that allows you to start using the tools, start thinking in the patterns of how to solve these problems, then that has exposed a lot of people to like really accelerate their sort of like understanding of the field. Then with game development, on the other hand, we tend to run workshops that we then record and put on YouTube. And so these are like maybe design workshops, maybe a little bit about developing in a certain tool or language or engine. I think one of my favorite ones that I did, I have a friend who's an instructor at Carleton, Connor Hillen. He and I ran game jams for like a few years together, and he ran a sort of workshop at our most recent game jam that focused on sort of like what tools you can use to make like what we call lo-fi art or assets or anything. And so it's like you don't want to make really good quality stuff because it's a jam, you need to go fast. And so
yeah,
instead, how do you use like Audacity to come up with like creepy noises, or how do you use like some type of like pixel editor to come up with art? And with those, I really like watching how he does it, because his approach to creativity is like super different from mine. Mine is
yeah,
like, I can draw a few things, but I don't really know how to use these tools. And his is, oh, I've like found really creative ways to use these tools in like non-conventional ways. And so with each of these events, it definitely leaves a lot of room for having educational content on top of the challenge or competition itself. And so I think
yeah,
that's what I enjoy most, is students being able to go back, learn from it retroactively. And I mean, at the events, the biggest thing for me is learning outcome. I don't want the people who are already succeeding a lot to be my main focus. Like they can
yeah.
do their stuff. They'll win the CTF, whatever. That's cool. They get a prize. What my goal is taking the students who don't have very much experience and getting them up to the first level where they can then go a lot further.
Yeah, that's a awesome call. Let's say it's reminded me of the survival bias. Like when I'm not sure if you know that, but it's like when the airplane used to return back to the people, like to the base, and then at that time they used to check like what's working, and they used to cover like the thing that in the okay, let's I will keep it here. So for people to understand survival bias, you can go Google it right now. But like for you, when you mentioned like the people who are successful and you don't want to focus on them, if you focus on them you will like forget the people who are new and doesn't have a path, like because the successful people already know their path, already know like their passion, but like the other people it's just like the one who are, let's say, underprivileged and they doesn't have someone someone to mentor them and help them. And this is like a nice
Mhm.
thing from your side. I think like staying at university for a long time helped you to stay like and to connect with people, even like when you have some kind of, let's say, seniority and some kind of knowledge to provide it to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it has changed the dynamic quite a lot, where because I've been around for so long, like I've become friends with a lot of the professors and instructors and staff in the school of computer science. And so, like, for example, like as I was mentioning, Connor Hillen and I, we go get coffee quite often, talk a lot about pedagogy and education, a lot of this kind of stuff. And then on the other hand, with some of the other professors, like I would play board games with them over the summer every week and this kind of thing. And so for a first year student who comes in and
Yeah,
talks to me and I tell them this story, I tell it to them in terms of like encouraging them to go meet their professors and talk to their professors. But
yeah,
on the other hand, so we have, I think this year we had something like 750 first year students coming in to computer science. And so we have like two big auditoriums where they have their academic orientation. And so each room would have like 300 students and the capacity is like 200 or something like that. So way too many students in there. But we had the opportunity at the beginning of this year as a computer science society to go in and talk to these students, because there's a lot of people need to talk to them. There's a lot of time in between transitions. And so we use this time to kind of like ask them questions, get feedback from them, and then allow them to ask us questions about what university was like. And
yeah,
a lot of the stuff that I heard from students we answer questions like hackathons about like what it's like being a university student. And a lot of students, they'll go do their courses and all this kind of stuff. But one of the biggest things for students coming in is just understanding what culture is like at university. And this is something that's
Yeah.
very difficult to impart without having experience themselves. And so we always have a talk at the beginning of the year where we try and give them perspectives of upper year students. And I think for like a lot of students coming in, they really want to just hear from people who are living in that experience. And so
Yeah.
my position, I do have to take a step back. So one of the things you mentioned with survivorship bias is like the helping the people who are already on top is not as effective. And this is something that really resonated with me, because I was at a conference in January, and one speaker talked about how when it comes to like having a resume roast in general, the idea is you have some people from the industry, some recruiters come in and take a look at students' resumes and tell them what works and what doesn't work. And one point that this guy made during his talk was that it is a talk on like sort of imposter syndrome and sort of just kind of grappling with differences in education and this kind of stuff. And he pointed out that when someone comes in and shows off their resume or submits their resume to be looked at, and there's someone who's already had like 3 FANG jobs at Google and Meta and all this kind of stuff, and they have everything, they have the perfect resume.
Yeah.
The recruiters might say some stuff about it, might comment on it, but it's going to have a much larger effect on the people who come in and want advice on resumes, because they're going to look at it and say, oh, this person's getting criticism and feedback and all of this kind of stuff, and they have all of these jobs and this massive amount of experience. Like, how could I ever get to that point? And so
Yeah.
I think for myself, I definitely understood that a lot, and that helped me change my sort of view on how I talk to younger students, where a lot of in like the past several years, it's been a lot about me telling students what my experience is. But on the other hand, nowadays I do a lot of like listening to their experience and then kind of asking them questions and getting them to figure out for themselves what they're looking for. And so I think that's like sort of like wisdom, where it's not me sharing all of my knowledge, it's me listening to their knowledge and then giving recommendations on their knowledge. And so that has changed a lot over the last few years.
That's like the idea itself is really interesting, because like when you do that, you can like when you listen to them and you get like something about for their experience, and you just like can guide them to the thing that they want based on your experience. So it's kind of turned to mentorship stuff you are doing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is something that's missing out a lot in university in general, is
Yeah.
this area of mentorship, just because numbers wise, it's very difficult to have enough teachers assistants to help enough students. And so with mentorship, a lot of the time, like I won't do a lot of outreach into trying to find people who want mentorship. But on the other hand, I make it very accessible that if people want mentorship, they can ask me and they can do stuff like that. And I've built some communities in my university around that idea. And so like I taught a summer course last year that I called Summer of Rust. And it was not like accredited, it's not part of the university, it's just something that students could come to. But I did like a big call for anybody interested. And a lot of the course that I ran wasn't like, last year it was a lot about lecturing. If I run it again this summer, I'm hoping to, I want it to be a lot less about lecturing and a lot more about interacting and getting students to try and sort of teach themselves a lot of things.
That's really interesting idea. Like since it's related to, like you already mentioned communities at the beginning of the conversation, and open source is based on communities in general. Like human life is based on communities, and turning such stuff into like interaction is kind of building bonds and connections between the people and giving like empowering the community. And you might like, since you are talking about interaction, you might find some people that you might choose to find to help others as well, and that within the community itself.
Yeah, and I mean, this is one of the big sort of action items or outcomes that I wanted from this. Was after the Summer of Rust, I ran one again in the fall, and it was a bit more difficult because school was happening. But a lot of the people over the summer, I transitioned them into mentor positions where they would be able to help others. And I think the execution on it could be improved, because I was still doing the lectures and I was still doing the main stuff. But I came up with a lot of activities that worked really well to have, for example, one person helping another. And so focusing on these types of activities, it works because my scale is like working with 20 students. It's not working with 200 students.
Yeah.
But being able to see where I can try to scale different parts. And so one activity that I do that I've got a lot of good feedback from, and it seems a little bit backwards from how we learn computer science university is a big focus on code reading. And so essentially you get like a big block of code, you don't know what it does, and then you have different techniques that you use to go through and look at it. And so you might start by saying, okay, and actually this is one of my favorite ones, is saying you have 100 lines of code, which 3 lines are the most interesting to you? And you don't give any definition of interesting, you don't give any definition of what should be important. And most importantly, people should be looking at things that they aren't familiar with. Yeah. And so people will come up with lines, they'll be able to compare with one another what they said was interesting and why they found it interesting. And so maybe they can compare it to other languages that they know, or maybe they found it interesting because it's confusing and complex. And this allows people to kind of share where they're coming from and maybe where some of their struggles are in understanding. And I think for myself, it's really allowed me to see that people can teach themselves way more than they think they can. And it takes a lot of work off of me to just send them off into groups and do that.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. Like the last bit when you said like people can teach themselves, like it's always about teaching themselves and about self-learning. So even if you like brought someone to a conference or let's say a room and you start to lecture them about the topic that you are talking about, you will not be able like to let them understand or let them listen to you. But like when they are interested about that and when they see like they have some kind of um, let's say ownership of the thing that they are doing, it will give them like higher understanding of the topics that they are doing, or higher, let's say, productivity as well.
Yeah, well, and I mean, you use like the term ownership there, and I think that's just one of the big things for people when you're doing an assignment. It doesn't feel like you have ownership over it because you're just doing what the instructions say. And so as soon as you can break people out of that box and say explore and give them reason to explore, then that ownership can scale insanely high, which is so cool, because some people might find their passion within it. They'll say, I'm really curious about how this works and want to go down that rabbit hole. And I don't want to guide them on that rabbit hole. I'll give them answers if they ask, but I'm not there to say, oh, like you need to check this out in this order kind of thing. And so, yeah, when people can feel ownership, and I think I associate that a lot with passion. I think that if you have a passion to learn something, then it really gives you the motivation to continue looking further yourself without the need of someone else to help you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like when we talked about mutual ownership, I just remembered that like I think GitHub has their own style of that, giving the people ownership and letting them be free about what they are doing. I read like I read a tweet about that when Basil Blady, he's a senior software engineer at GitHub, and he mentioned like they are doing something like that. I might add the link to that tweet on the description for people who are curious about that. Awesome.
Yeah.
And yeah, go.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that would be pretty cool to see. I think for myself, because I'm in university, I have a lot of experience on things from the perspective of a student and not necessarily from the perspective of like working for some company. And so for myself, I love reading these kind of blog posts to see what happens internally in places. Because like the dynamics are similar in some ways and different in some others. And so the way that I work with students works really well. I think works really well for the context, but I don't know if it would work well at a company. Like motivations are super different between the two. And so, I mean, even that I can get students to come out and like learn something over the summer without them needing to do that, I kind of feel that I have to give them reasons to. And so I have like this Notion document for the Summer of Rust course that tries to describe why I think people should take this course and kind of go through with it and learn, even though it's their summertime. And so, it'd be interesting to see that article.
That's awesome. And since you are mentioning GitHub and you already mentioned Campus Expert at the beginning of the conversation, like I would ask you, like, how did you get like involved with the open source communities at the beginning? Like how you found your first open source community and how you found first contribution you started there.
Yeah, and so this is a super interesting question because I've been pondering it. So I think the more workshops I give on Git and GitHub, the more I question whether I'm doing it in the right way. Where, for example, one of the biggest outcomes that I would love is every October, I want to push people to do Hacktoberfest. I want people to try making their own pull request, to try finding what they can contribute to. And then I've also worked with students over the summer to work on different projects at the university. And so we put this website together called discretemath.ca. And it kind of takes course content that we have for our discrete math courses and allows people to do practice problems with them. And with these projects or Hacktoberfest or any open source contribution, I want to tell people, here's how you get started, and here's how I would look for resources, and here's how I would approach doing a lot of this work. But it doesn't really translate to them being able to go and sit down and do something themselves right off the bat. And so I try to think back to when I was first doing my first Hacktoberfest, let's say. And I took a look around. I dove into some problems. I had some pull requests that maybe I had on like a product that I had on my own GitHub repository, and it counted because I was adding some stuff to it. But I do remember some of the areas where I did contributions to other projects that felt pretty big to me. And so I don't remember the exact chronological order, but I remember there is one where it's a JavaScript interpreter in Rust, and I went through and changed out some of like the parser to parse semicolons a little bit differently. And that felt like a complex one. I was able to talk to the developers. I was able to get feedback. I was able to go through it, but it took about a week, maybe a bit more than a week, kind of like on and off discussion to go through that. So that was a more difficult one. I felt that like I learned a lot, but I don't feel like I could tell a student, this is how you get into open source. And then on the other hand, there's contributions like documentation. So I went to some Python repositories, and there's for different libraries that I use, and just make something more clear or clean up some formatting and a README or something like that. And so I think I really like encouraging students to do that, because helping with documentation and figuring out how to make your first pull request like that is a really good way to go. Then somewhere in the middle is you find some GitHub issue that you resonate with, that like you understand why it's a problem. Then you go and you're able to solve this problem relatively quickly. And so maybe this is a GitHub issue that has like the good first issue tag or has a Hacktoberfest tag, and people are able to help you. And it doesn't take too much understanding to go through. And so I think that was like sort of the first few Hacktoberfest was trying to go through that path. But then on the other hand, I think the way that I got started with an open source community was back in the beginning of 2019. I got involved with like the Valorant project. And so this is a video game similar to Minecraft, built in Rust. It's focused like on adventure, and like there's like some like cute characters around the world that you can that you play as and stuff like this. And so when I started on this project, it was about 6 months into development, and they were just starting their new version of the engine. And so the first engine, it was more of a prototype to see how the architecture works. Some things worked, some things didn't. And this new version of the engine was just starting out right as I joined. And I tried to look around the code. I tried to see what I could do. And I was very motivated to do this because it was a project that I wanted to make myself. It's inspired by this game called Cube World. I really liked Cube World, and I wanted to try making a game in Rust. I wanted to try developing this type of voxel world with procedural generation similar to Minecraft. And at first I looked into the code, I worked with some other developers, and I realized that there's a lot that I didn't know about Rust and that I didn't feel like capable of doing, and that I didn't understand the reasoning behind. And I like that though, because it lets me look back at like what it felt like to me to not know Rust. And so I can kind of use that when I'm teaching students to go through and help them understand different things, or rather understand where they're coming from when they don't understand something or certain things. So with Valorant, the way that I got in after I realized that I wasn't really at the development level was I saw that they had dev blogs, well, rather one dev blog that they had posted several months ago, and there wasn't really another one after that. So I started just taking weekly information, putting it onto the dev blog, and trying to kind of talk with some of the developers on what their experiences were. And that started out like a little bit loose. I kind of just put some images on this blog and a little bit of talking with people, but it didn't really have sections written by the developers. But as it went on and as it progressed, it's really cool seeing like the evolution of how I wrote blog posts for that, where it started out very basic, just a lot of images. Then it transitioned to like an era of I would be reaching out to developers a lot, getting a lot of people to write content, and I would be editing that. And then there's like a newer era where it wasn't as much about taking updates from or curating a lot of updates, but just having sort of a heartbeat shown off because there's a weekly blog post being put out. But I was mostly adding images again, some stuff here and there. And then recently, over like the last several months, I've been on like a little bit of a hiatus from it. So some other people on the project have been taking up like the blog post and working on it. And so there's some interesting areas in each of those where sort of, there was like the learning phase. There was the I'm used to this and this is just something I do every week. And then a little bit of like the burnout phase at the end where I started working on like a lot of other projects, a lot of other stuff within the Rust community. And then uh, sort of found for myself what it looked like to take a step back from the project. Because one of the things I've been talking about within Valorant for a long time was making sure that, and I guess like more internally, like if we had a meeting, I would always encourage people to like, it's an open source project, it's a hobby project. If you need to take a break, then feel free to tell the team, and it's not you stepping back from your role. It's you taking a break, and you're always welcome back. And so that was something that for myself I had to grapple with, because I'm like, oh, I'm in that position where I'm not able to contribute as much right now, and my level of contribution has gone down significantly. But I don't want to say that I'm in a place where I need to take a hiatus. And so when I finally did, I'm like, okay, this is what needs to happen. And since then, I've been helping it with some of the stuff here and there, but definitely not as active of a role. But it's given me time to like regain energy and find where I can take that, I guess, get that motivation again to continue with that, or rather put it into my weekly schedule again. And so, yeah, I think that's like a longer story of sort of how the blog post works, which is like a small section of what I've done with Valorant. I do like a lot of other outreach. So make YouTube videos, do a lot of several interviews and podcasts and different talks here and there. So yeah.
That's really awesome. Like, it's especially interesting for people who want to join like a open source community or something like that, and they are not sure about where to start. Like, you started from something, as you mentioned, something like no one was doing for a long time, which is the blog post,
Mhm.
and then you moved into like, I think you are in the core team right now.
Yeah, and so this has been interesting, and this was another thing I had to grapple with. I'm like, I'm writing blog posts. I'm not writing the core engine itself. I'm doing a lot of
Yeah.
stuff with our Git setup and continuous integration, and I do a lot of the server stuff. But I'd never felt like a core developer, and so for a long time, I was just in like the admin role, which was like the role right below it, where I was able to moderate everything. I was able to have the freedom over the blog, but I never called myself a core developer. But since then, I've moved up to that role, and so it's really great though, because I think, yeah, it's the kind of thing where I can say to others who are in a similar position, who work on different stuff that's not the core engine but is just as important. I can say to them, "Oh yeah, you're definitely a core developer," and I like would push for their being added to the core developer role. But then for myself, I'm like, no, I'm not going to take that role just yet. And so it's yeah, very interesting to kind of look at it from both perspectives.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like when you are doing such thing, you already like I think it's like you are facing some kind of imposter syndrome there, and that might help other people when you are talking with them, and you will feel them how they feel, so you can help them better.
Yeah, imposter syndrome is like very weird. How like even for myself, after working on it for such a long time, like I didn't feel like a core developer, even
Yeah.
though, and I mean, at the same time, I see like a lot of the other developers not entirely sure if they would want to come on to like one of the we have like our Valorant reading club where we get a developer to walk through some parts of the code or show some stuff off. And so a lot of what I do is like encouraging other people that their contributions are super valuable. And I think the dev blog also helps a lot with this, where over the years it's made it so that anybody who wants to say that they've done any work with a project has a platform to do so. And I would never go through and say this isn't a valid thing to have in the dev blog. It's always, if you've written something, then I would love to have it there. And
Yeah.
so that has been really cool, so that someone who comes on and comes up with some small, like some idea, some piece of art, some sound, some piece of code, even people talking about why they find it difficult to use the code, is a great thing to have in the dev blog. And so building that platform, not just for the core developers, but for anybody who wants to be part of the project.
That's awesome. Like, even when you like accept this kind of small contributions, you are showing two things for people. One of them is like open source is not just about coding, and you are opening the door for other like kind of open source contribution, which is like blogs and stuff like that. And the second thing that you are showing is that even small contributions, it still matter. Like, because
Yeah,
people feel like small contributions like they they are like underlook it and or overlook it, and they don't care much about that.
absolutely. And I think for a lot of people as well, when you work on, or when you see certain products that are growing, it can be very difficult to feel like you have even like a partial ownership in the contribution you made. And so with Valoran, we want it to feel like this is an open source project made by people who are interested in the idea of the game, but the people who are the core developers, we don't want it to feel like you can't talk to us and that we're above others or anything like that. Instead, we want it to feel like we're leaders in the community, but it's a very like flat hierarchy where everybody is like very active in discussions in different channels and kind of just seeing what comes from a lot of, and I think for me, like super humbling as well. We were talking about this before the episode a little bit, where with this open source, just like general dynamic is you get to work with people from all around the world, and
Yeah.
you get to meet people in different cultures and different time zones and who speak different languages and work on entirely different things than you do. And for me, that's been like one of the coolest things working with Valoran is meeting all these people. I actually got to meet like the founder of the project, Zester. I've been to England like twice in the past year for some conferences, and we got to hang out a little bit. I got to meet him, and to me, that's just like the coolest thing ever. Is like starting out a project in like 2019 and getting to work with these people for a long time, and then get to meet them in real life. And it's like, yeah, it just like transitioned from like sort of me even being like, can I contribute to this project, to writing the dev blog, to becoming a core developer, to meeting the others. It's super cool.
Yeah, awesome. And even this like story, like for I will talk about some kind of people who I know around that they always ask like how we can contribute to open source, but like telling your story that's starting from the blogs and moving to contribution and meeting and preparing all of this stuff is just kind of interesting thing to share with them. From that perspective, like how you found like that, like from the people around, what would be the best advice you give them to start with open source?
Yeah, and so I think one area of contribution that I've never, or as far as I remember, I never have had someone say no to, like in a pull request, is me improving their documentation. Right,
Yeah.
like I found something wrong with someone's code description, or something that could be like I ran into a problem, I didn't understand this for a long time, I wanted to go fix it, and that gave me the ability to go make a pull request, to talk with the maintainer a little bit, and so that worked really well. Is just adding a little bit more documentation, fixing something like that. Then, on the other hand, when it comes to code things, I think one of the most important things is that a project that I would recommend people to contribute to, or that I would contribute to myself, it pretty much always has to have some type of community on top of it, where I can go into Discord, I can ask questions in a developer chat, I can chat with the maintainers. That's super important to me, because otherwise I don't feel like, unless I know exactly what I'm trying to solve the problem for, maybe it's just like some Python library is pretty small and I can go into the code and fix it or whatever. I really want to talk to people. And I think that's one of the biggest things about open source, is that it's so much more focused on community than other positions and other jobs. And it's community first in a lot of ways, where maybe there are open source projects that don't have a big community behind it. And it makes it more difficult to grow. It makes it more difficult to scale, or to find problems, or to just solve stuff. But every single time I think I see this a lot through the Rust game dev meetup that I run, is when I get the opportunity to talk to the people about the projects that they're working on, I feel like I'm able to see so much more into their motivations and their goals, and where they want help, and what they are aiming to do, and all of this kind of stuff. And so definitely having communities, I think, is super important, and being able to onboard new people is a really good way for you to get your open source project worked on by others. But then from the other side, it gives you as a contributor, as a new contributor, it gives you a way to feel like there's some amount of interactivity to the project, not just trying to fix some code that doesn't have meaning behind it.
Yeah, like even like if someone like when you think about the open source, it's usually like each project has its own like goal. That the goal is not just like something that's pure technical, and you have something that a goal that can impact people's lives, which is like the reason which is like a lot of the open source project that they started and they are growing right now. It reminds me of like in an era like there used some kind of people who used to have like thinking about like writing a programming language that is so effective and so hard to understand and something like that, but like that kind of programming language just died after a while. I think
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if you have heard about them, but like I'm not sure about the like the name, but like I know one of the language that used to be a brainfuck language.
Yeah.
So
I was
like
thinking you were gonna say that. That's a classic.
yeah, that's the classic language. So it's just like it was an era like a lot of similar language that they born, but like they died at after a short time and no one used them. But like on the other side, you see like Python that is highly growing, or even JavaScript because of like the easy barrier or like the low barrier for that.
Yeah, and I mean, so I think like the title for a lot of these is like SOLang, where it's like a language that doesn't necessarily have purpose other than to show off some like nifty thing about language development or some cool idea. And so like one of my favorite ones is it looks like a play written by Shakespeare, and you go in and it says like, okay, Hamlet enters stage left, Juliet is in there, or whatever, and like it's able to execute something. And from my perspective, at first I'm like, oh, this is a cool thing. From a CTF perspective, it's really fun to make challenges where you just give someone some code that's written in one of these languages and they have to figure out what language it is. And then also from a language making perspective, it's a lot of fun to come up with these ideas. And so definitely I've not really studied them, but I've explored them. There's like this wiki online for SOLangs, and it goes through, it just has like all of them listed, and you can kind of get a understanding of not why people were doing it, but what cool ideas there are out there for SOLangs.
Yeah, that's awesome. And from your perspective, since you talked about like open source communities and things like that, how you see like let's say the growing of open source in education in general, and more specifically in your like community and your university?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's interesting because at my university, they in courses, there's been a heavier push to get students to use Git and GitHub.
Yeah.
However, there's not a place in our curriculum that teaches you how to use either. And so, like I've had some of the instructors invite me to a lecture to run a GitHub workshop for them because they don't necessarily know it all themselves. And I mean, it's a little bit at odds with academia where to get a PhD, you don't need to know Git and GitHub. It's just something that is very prevalent in the industry. And so
Yeah.
I think at my university, one of the questions I asked like those 750 first year students or however many that were in the classrooms at the beginning of the year is how many of you already have a GitHub account? And compared to when I was in first year, I would estimate like maybe 10% of first year students would have one, probably even less. And now it was a lot closer to 50. And so I think that is really exciting to see. I think that with stuff like code spaces, this is something that we've used in our summer projects because I really hate setting up Python and JavaScript environments on students' computers when they're using like Windows, and I have to set it a lot for them. But on the other hand, getting people to use code spaces has been made workshops a lot easier. It's made interacting with projects a lot easier. And so I've really been trying to put pressure on my university to have more involvement with getting students to work on projects that are helpful for university courses. And so, for example, with like our discrete math website, this has been a recommended resource in some of the discrete math courses for like the past few years. And I would really love the university to pay more students to work on these kind of things because I think that they are open source projects. All the source code is available, but getting students to be paid to work on these types of things would really push forward their availability to courses and help out a lot. Then I guess on the third side of things is like if you are a computer science society and you're running a workshop for students to maybe make their own personal website or do like a data science thing, I think that these are really, really great, but it's really difficult to scale them. Like it's really difficult to get a ton of students to come out. It's really difficult to be able to give something that they can work on for a longer period of time. And so what I would really like to see personally is more courses at university just using Git and GitHub, because first of all, it's like an industry standard. And second of all, is because it really encourages a lot more of the assignments to be either group work or
Yeah.
some amount of consideration of what your code looks like over time. And so this, if it was a learning outcome in courses, which I think it should be in the same way that like just using an IDE is in code, then I think that would be a lot more conducive to having open source be not such a far step ahead for a student to do.
Yeah. And like here, I just remembered when you talked about like you don't like to set up like the ID and all
Hmm.
languages on and students' computer. It just reminded me of the born of Replit. Uh, so like the founder Amjad started Replit because he doesn't like this stuff when he was doing his when he was studying at university, and he used to go to
Hmm.
his university labs to use such like tools and everything, and he wanted to be able to use it from his own like personal computer, and that's how it was born. And right now they are a company, and they made some kind of agreement with or partnership with Google recently.
Yeah. And I think with something like Replit and other similar ones, like it does surprise me. So first of all, it surprises me how much of a niche was open for this type of stuff to come in, where it's just
Yeah,
like we've just become I would say sort of complacent in how we're like, oh, our computers can do everything, we want them to do everything. So that's the first part. And then second of all, like the idea of cycles in technology, I think is crazy that like in like the 70s and 80s, computing was done on mainframes in universities where you timeshare. You'd say, I have this problem, send it to the university computer, it would run for 5 minutes or whatever, and then you get your answer back. And that is like the exact same thing as code spaces or Replit or Gitpod or anything like this, where you have your development environment on a different server and you're just asking it to do stuff for you. And so it's very interesting to me that like the entire, like, let's say from 1995 to like 2010, it was all just you have to have your own computer do all the work. And so
yeah.
it's definitely quite interesting.
And the other interesting part here, like you see, like students are playing a major part of that, like say, the community, and for that, like usually industry doesn't like overlook them and doesn't care about their issues, but like you see the code spaces and their plate and other this kind of stuff like started as something that students can use and help it be helpful for them, and then it moved to something that was industry based and like industry based, and everyone is using industry. Not everyone, but like yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the overall, like I would say, if you look at the average of how the industry moves over time, I think it's definitely a lot more now towards a development environment locally on your computer being set up within like a Docker container or a virtual machine or something like this that's reproducible, or having it on a cloud.
Yeah. And here I just like remembered another story. It's like Ivy with a machine learning framework, which we hosted the founder of it a few weeks ago, and he was talking about like he started Ivy because of an issue he faced during his PhD.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
like there is a lot of stuff that student and university can provide, but like we need like people need to understand it or be able to utilize it, let's say.
Oh, of course. And like I think too, all of the students in science at Carleton at my university, where if they're doing like their master's or their PhD, then and I mean even my cousin, she was doing chemistry at Guelph, and for her when she was writing code, maybe like MATLAB or something like that, there was a thing where in her lab she would get someone with the fastest gaming computer to run the code for her, because instead of taking like I don't know 20 days, it will take like 12 hours or something like that, because that probably like GPU based. And to me, I'm like, how is it that institutions don't have like aren't like really taking over this problem of saying, okay, you're using software, you're trying to solve these problems, and because you're trying to solve your problem in this way, we're going to give you support for running it on our massive CPU GPU cluster, all of this kind of stuff. And so I think for myself, that's something I really want to see more at Carleton, is making a lot of the data center resources super accessible to research students. Now, I say it's something that I want. I don't know if it's something that I can make happen as easily. I've done stuff before where I've run like Jupyter Lab on the servers for a course, like an undergraduate course, but it would definitely take more oversight from, say, the School of Computer Science to make this type of thing accessible to any student within Carleton, I think. But yeah, I definitely see where you're coming from with that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And like I think we are about to end that, but like the podcast, it's like almost the time. But like I would like to know about, since you already mentioned like you are reading books before like getting into coding, and you mentioned that Game Dev 14s, I think, and you mentioned the blogs that you are writing. So I think you read a lot. So are you reading anything these days?
Yeah, so I thought you were going to ask the question of what do you recommend in books, and I'm
Yeah,
like,
that's the next question.
yeah. So I'll answer that question first by saying I think that the books I'm reading would not translate to be helpful for anybody else unless you wanted to find them helpful. And so
Yeah.
what I mean by that is I have some like Rust textbooks, and I like them because I like Rust and I want to learn more, and that is great motivation for me. There's like the big books in computer science, and actually, I got one right here. One sec.
Yeah, sure.
So I have, okay, I got like Rust textbooks. I'm like a technical reviewer on these. I got my name in them. That's pretty cool. But
That's
this one right here, this is a computer science book. It's
compiler's principle.
Yes, and so this is known as the Dragon Book, and
Yeah.
because it has like the dragon on the cover and stuff like that, and so it's one of like this is the Dragon Book. Then I also have one upstairs that's the Algorithm Book, and that one goes through like a ton of algorithms. And then you have like cracking the coding interview, and like these are the ones that at least in like Canada and at my university they're like pretty colloquially known by those names. Like you would say the Dragon Book, people would know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
However, if we look at the Dragon Book, I'm like not very far. Like you can't really see how far. I'm not very far at all. Like I've read like 50 pages, and it's super complex. And the best advice that I got about, so it's about making compilers and stuff like that. The best advice that I got from Zester, like my friend who started the Learn project, was stop reading the book and write a language. And then I did that for a language jam, and I got something super cool out of it. And I'm like, okay, well, there's a lot of theory in this compiler's book, but I don't need it to get started with what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And so now on the other hand, okay, so that was to answer the second question that you didn't ask yet. What would I recommend to read? What I'm reading right now is I just got like my friends to give me recommendations on books, and I'm just like, I don't care what type of book it is, just if you liked a book, tell me. And so I got like a stack of like 5 books from friends, and so one of them is Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. It's interesting. I haven't read very many books like it. I can't tell if I find it boring or interesting yet, and it's not very long, and so that was kind of cool. And then second of all, I'm also reading a book called Ichigo Ichi, which is like making the most out of every moment. It's also relatively short, and both of them are not related to computer science at all, but I'm enjoying them in their own ways because there's stuff that I'm not used to. And so I think what I would say is there are books that get you information, and like for example that textbook that I found when I was 12, game programming for teens, it was super helpful for what I needed right then, and it let me read it, like I read it cover to cover because I'm like, oh yeah, I love this knowledge, I'm getting so much out of it, I'm experiencing a lot. But I wouldn't sit down now if I hadn't read that book. I wouldn't go through that book right now and have that same kind of feeling, I think. And so I think for me it's very dependent on what I need at a certain time, where I read a medium amount, I would say. It has been like big breaks. I have like this Google Doc right now where every time I finish a book, I put it in there. And there's like places where it's like a 1-year break in between books.
Yeah.
Well, okay, here I'll give this recommendation. One book that I read recently that I really, really enjoyed is actually like a series of books. The first book is called The 3-Body Problem. And it's like a sci-fi book, deals a lot with physics and space and aliens and this kind of stuff. And for me, I really enjoyed the outcome of the third book, and it made me think a lot. And so I think maybe I'd recommend that. Yeah, that's like, again, not related to computer science. Cool book though.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like that's interesting about like how you mentioned like a couple of times that like when you start to read the team book about programming, you didn't understand it and you finish it. But like after a while, like let's say a couple of years, you start to understand that. Like I think this kind of thing, like let's say learning is hard and it consume and takes time, but like in our age right now, everything we need like just like a fast thing, and people like somehow forget about books.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think this is something that I sort of felt last summer because I walked, like my local library is 10 minutes away. I've lived in this house for like 3 years and I have not gone to it except for like last summer. And so
Yeah.
when I went into the library, I had like an overwhelming feeling of like, I read when I was young, I enjoyed it a lot. And it feels weird to be in a place where there's so much knowledge and I'm not taking part in that. And so I picked out a random book. It's called Two Trees Make a Forest. And I liked it because the cover was cool and it had my name in it. And I'm like, okay, I'll read this book. And so it's about Taiwan. It talks about like the nature and geography. And it was very interesting. But I think maybe another recommendation I would make is go to if you haven't read in a long time and you want to get back into read, or you want to try reading. I don't want to say like get back into it, because it takes a lot to build the habit, but just go to the library. If you like nonfiction stuff, what I would say is go find some random nonfiction book, open it up to some random page and start reading from there. If you read from the beginning, it's going to start too slow. If you read from the middle, it might like be like you have no idea what's going on, but it gets you right into the middle of stuff. Or if you like fiction, just go pick some random book and try reading like the first 10 pages in the library. Like you don't need to take it home. Like you don't need a library card to take it off the shelf and read it. And so I think for myself, those were like good catalysts to be like, oh, this is a very unique feeling that I wanted that I haven't experienced in a long time.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And like, I like the advice like that you already give about like just read a book like from around the page and you will understand. Like you will move forward from that. And the other
Yeah.
thing that I liked, it's just like you are not just reading books about computer science, and you're reading stuff from outside computer science, and that like might give you some kind of different perspective and let you transform your idea or let's say your knowledge from a domain to a different domain.
Yeah, and one of the places that I work while I'm here in Ottawa is a co-op working space called the Impact Hub. And what I really like about it is, so the idea of the Impact Hub is a co-working space for companies that align with the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah.
And there's hardly any computer scientists in there. And so when I go in and I talk with the people there and there's different events and stuff, I never talk about coding. I just hear from them about maybe what they're working on or what they're interested in or what they would recommend checking out. And I find that to be like a super great dichotomy to my everyday life of dealing with coders. And it's not bad to deal with coders. It's just that in getting these book recommendations from my friends that aren't related to computer science, and in hearing from these people at the Impact Hub who live different lives and work on different problems and are also aligned with generally the same things that I agree with in life, I have been exposed to so much more than I could be exposed by going to any computer science conference. And so for myself, definitely it's like been a lot about stepping outside of right where I am and trying to let other people not 100% dictate how I should do stuff, but like getting their ideas sort of put into what I'm learning.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like even like when you do this, it's just like utilize the idea that computer science is just like a tool that will help people in their life because like uh, sometimes you might do something like really technical, but like no one will use it, and that will be some kind of like a disappointment for the people who are doing it. But like you can like leverage it for life as well. It just reminded me of the Apple company, like when they started with Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs. Like Steve Wozniak
Yeah.
was the geek guy, and he had like personal computer, but like the marketing was on Steve Jobs. So like he just like
Yeah.
utilized the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of the time when it comes to starting projects and working on ideas and a lot of this, it definitely needs to be cross-disciplinary where you're working with people who come at stuff from different angles from you. And I think in our computer science programs, we often get surrounded by ideas that are just within computer science, and it's a lot of fun. I love talking about coding with people, but we don't often enough. And I guess at Carleton, we sort of have a little bit of prevention against us where let's say we have to take 40 courses, I think. Of those 40, I think only between like 20 and 25 are computer science related.
Yeah.
Maybe. Is it 40 courses? Seems like a lot. I don't know. Maybe I'm incorrect about that. Maybe it's like 20 courses, whatever. So only about half of them are computer science related, and the rest we have to take are either free electives where it's like whatever we want. It could be computer science, it could be whatever else. And then part of them, they can't be related to science at all. You have to take something that's maybe like languages or psychology or anything like that. And so I think that's super important for us to be just exposed to things that aren't computers and get a better broad understanding of the world.
Yeah, that's really good to know. Like before ending the podcast, I think we are already on time. I would like do you have like any advice or any word that would you like to end with it?
Yeah. So I think for myself, whenever I give talks, like my favorite quote to put in the end is from, I forget the movie's called. I think it's like iRobot or something. It's like 2005 Pixar. And there's a quote, it's like, see a need, fill a need. And that's one that I try to apply to so many things that I do, where if I'm recommending how a student gets into open source and into working on products, all of this is so much from what they see as a problem in the world and want to
Yeah.
fix. And so sometimes it starts from like listening to them, hearing what they think are the issues, and then going from there, making recommendations to them on or either what they could use to solve that problem, or hear from them what do they think they can use to solve the problem. So that's one of them. And then the other piece of advice that I have that I've used to guide me a lot in what I do is the first way to describe it is proactive serendipity. And the second way to describe it is increasing the surface area for success. And so the idea behind both of them is trying to put yourself in more areas where you're likely to succeed, and or rather where there's chance to succeed. And so every time you go to a meetup, every time you go to a conference, every time you meet a new person, every time you network, all of these aren't guaranteed to do what you might want of them if you're interviewing or if you're meeting a recruiter for the first time. If you're networking with them, it's not guaranteed to get you a job, but it's definitely going to increase the chance of something that you want happening. And so for me, a lot of when I run events and when I meet people and when I go to events, I've found that because I'm having so many of these situations, it has allowed me to really have a lot of really cool things happen and come from it. And so yeah, the proactive serendipity is like a little, you have to break it down a little bit more. Like proactive is like doing stuff before it happens, like putting yourself in the right place. And then serendipity is good things coming from it.
Yeah, it's really awesome idea and like awesome advice that you have given. It's like I really enjoyed talking with you today, and thank you
Yeah,
for joining.
absolutely. I really like kind of having relatively unguided, like I know you were talking about like open source and stuff, but being able to just kind of go in, chat about a lot of different things that we see from students and education in general. And yeah, it's been a ton of fun.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And thank you for everyone who joined today, and hope you see you in another episode in the future as well. Have a great time.